Good day to everyone, and I hope everyone had a good beginning of May. Depending on when, well, everybody's into May now, even no matter where you are. But I hope you had a good weekend and everything's going well. It's like 4 months. We're into the second quarter. Well, we've been into the second quarter. I'm just trying to catch up with all the time. Anyway, moving right along, which is probably why I'm still surprised it's May. Anyway, um, I've got a quote today about perfectionism that I recently found that I thought that it was something to discuss because I know a lot of people want to do things perfectly, and I find that that's really contrary to the benefits that people can get because they spend so much time on perfectionism. But I'll get into that in a little bit. Let me talk to you about the quote first. This came from Brene Brown. She's a researcher, a professor, and a social worker. And so she discusses how it's somewhat, again, same opinion of I have, contrary to what we should actually be looking for. Even though it seems like it should be a good idea, it's not. Perfectionism is a 20-ton shield that we lug around thinking it will protect us, when in fact, it is the thing that's really presenting us from taking flight. Excuse me, not presenting us, preventing us. It's really the thing that's preventing us from taking flight. So the idea is that we think we want to be perfect because we think we need to be really good at something. And being really good and being perfect are two totally different things. You can be good at, say, housekeeping. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to be perfect. That's the one class example I use because I definitely will never be a perfect housekeeper. So that's my particular bias, and I will own up to it. But most people might be perfect on one thing. If you think about people at the Olympics, they might get perfection once, twice, but it becomes really difficult. And that's part of the whole thing with perfection is once you do it, then you have to try and do it again. And so you build up this stress of, oh, gee, I've done it once, I've got to do it again. And it becomes really difficult to recognize the fact that if you've done it once, you might do it twice. Maybe perhaps could be 3 times if you're an exceptional athlete, perhaps, but for the rest of us, probably not. But we still have the stress of having to believe we're going to do it again and again and again. If you're doing really good, well, you can work toward perfection, you can get better. But once you've been perfect, how do you work toward anything other than maintaining the status quo, which then puts you under a bunch of stress because it's like, how do you keep it? And then you get so stressed that it's almost contrary and you almost can't be perfect again because you've got all that stress. Does that make sense? The other part for perfection is I find that it's a lousy time management technique. Let's just suppose, for the sake of argument, that you've got 4 hours to do 10 tasks. And if you decide you're going to be perfect on all of those 10 tasks, do you really think you're going to get all of them done in that 4 hours? Probably not, because you're going to want to make everything perfect. So you're going to spend more time trying to make them perfect. So that means something's not going to get done, most likely. Does that mean, but I mean, can you understand where I'm coming from on that? If you spend so much time trying to make one thing perfect, that means by default, something else is not going to get done, or something else is going to have to get done sloppily, which is going to be upsetting because you want everything to be perfect. So then you get into this kind of spiral downhill of stress because you're trying to make everything perfect or trying to be good at everything or whatever. I mean, I've met very few people who want to be perfect in one thing and then could care less about everything else. They do exist, but the majority of people I know seem to feel that they've got to be perfect in a lot of things or except reasonably good. And the other part to it is I don't know anybody who meets that criteria. So let's think about this for a moment. You might know somebody who's really, 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 really good at something, whatever that is. How do you feel about that person? Maybe it's okay for that one thing if it's not something you do. But what if that person did really, 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 really well on lots of things, 4 or 5 or 6? At some point in time, human nature being what it is, we don't like those people. We begin to have to compare ourselves with somebody who's, quote, perfect, even if the other things, somebody may be a perfectly dressed person, but you don't see what they're like in the inside of their house. And as the saying goes, just because they look perfect doesn't mean that internally they may not be good. People thought that Robin Williams was, a very funny man, and except he was absolutely in pain, and that's why he committed suicide. so that we can't see what the inside of a person is. We can just see the quote perfect outside, and we somehow seem to think that the outside and everything else is going to be perfect. So what you're doing is you're looking at these people and you're seeing them, they're going to be perfect, and then you tend to compare yourself to them. And sooner or later, something tends to happen. Either your self-esteem takes a nosedive because you're trying to compare yourself with somebody perfect, or you start to kind of dislike the other person because they are perfect and you know that you'll never get there. It's kind of like a self protection mechanism. If you ever really stop to think about it, the more perfect somebody sees, a lot of people tend to find fault with them. And most of that comes because they can't be perfect themselves, so they've got to point fingers, right? So that if you think in terms that the more perfect you are, the more you seem to others to be attaining things that they can't, and so they get to be resentful. Does that make sense? Now, another issue is how much time does it take? But I've already kind of mentioned that. What kind of a role model are you being? So if you're a parent or an employer and you want your employees to be good role models, or you want your children to be good role models, if you're perfect, what are you teaching others? Because even if you say you don't have to be perfect, this is not necessary to be perfect. If you strive to be perfect, they're going to emulate you. Any of you who are parents or know anything about parents, or maybe you've heard somebody make this comment before, children do what they see and not what they're told. So you can tell them, oh, you don't have to worry about being perfect. But if they see you attempting to be perfect or worrying about it, they are going to do it. And so you are creating a role model for them to essentially be perfect. And you're pretty much setting themselves up for failure. Does that make sense? So think about it. Being a role model of perfection is not going to do you any good, or not going to do the other people any good, because they're not going to be able to do it. And even if they are striving toward it, you're going to be making them stress. And do you really want to do that? And think in terms of how many people are going to try and work toward being perfection because their parents wanted them to be perfect, and they're never going to be able to get there. If you know anybody that's really perfect, sorry about that, no pun intended, happy about that particular issue because of the stress that it puts them under, then you don't have, the time, because it takes that people learn to hate you, and you have to do it again and again and again. So those are just a few things about why being perfect is not really cool. So somebody can tell me why that on a practice, everything being perfect is good. Now, I'm not saying that you can't say make a perfect score on a test once, but think about it. You make a perfect score on a test once, then you get that stress to try and make a perfect score on a test again. The only thing I can think of that being perfect, one of the things that comes to mind, I guess you could have perfect score tests, but I thought of bowling. I haven't been bowling in years simply because my joints don't do that anymore. But you can make a perfect score in bowling and everybody can celebrate. But then the next time you get to the bowling alley, you've got that stress of trying to be perfect again. And so you're trying to keep that score up, and it's not going to be able to be possible. If you watch any particular kind of sports, you realize that once somebody's tried to do well, Miami Dolphins were perfect in football season a long time ago. I don't remember when. And they've been seeking to do that again. They can't do it. And everybody else has been trying to do it again. They did it once, and see how many years have happened, how many teams have come up, and nobody's been able to emulate it. So just think in terms that perfection is something you can look for and you can strive to be better. It motivates you to be something better than just sort of say, trashy or basic minimum or whatever. But don't think in terms, or I would strongly suggest you don't think in terms of trying to be perfect in everything. You do the best you can because that's the most reasonable. And it's also easier on you because you don't have to put yourself through the stress of trying to be perfect, because it just keeps you from doing other things. As it says, the quote said, it keeps you from just trying to do things, which keeps you from taking flight because you're being held down by this 20-ton shield that says, I've got to be perfect. What can you do to make others happy or to improve your life if you're still trying to be perfect? It keeps you down and it keeps you behind. And it doesn't, perfection that is. And what good does it do? So I hope this was helpful. If you know anybody who strives for protection, send them the link and see what they think about it. They probably won't like it because they want to be perfect. But, you know, gives you something to chat about anyway. Maybe as a way into a conversation about that you really don't have to be perfect, you know, especially if you know that it's your children. Or maybe children if you know that it's your parents, but you know how that goes. So anybody, let me know what you think, and we'll see you around next week. Everybody, take care and bye.